Well, hello and happy pre Thanksgiving. This is Empowering Democracy, and I'm Joe Firestone. And I see I screwed up my title because it doesn't have Empowering Democracy in front of it. But the topic for tonight, in any case, is taxes don't fund spending. And we will see as we go on why the but. Hello to the two of you who have joined me. Thank you for coming. Well, of course, the idea that taxes and bond revenue do not fund federal spending uh, comes from a very important paper that was written in 1998 originally and published as a working paper at the Levy Institute. The name of the working paper is let me see what the exact title. Can taxes and bonds finance government spending? And that is working paper number 244. It's one of the most important papers written by people following the MMT approach. The arguments that are presented here by Stephanie, are really relatively simple. They're hard to read through and get your mind around, but once you've been living with them for a while, they seem very, very intuitive. The first argument is, well, if taxes or bond revenue is necessary to fund the federal spending, well, what happens when the state actually begins and it wants to tax? If it hasn't issued any money yet, then there's no money out there to tax. And so, in order to tax, the state has to issue money in the first place, which proves, of course, that it can't be taxes that are funding federal spending. It has to be something else. That, is one argument. It's an argument. Taxes can't come first. Spending has to come first. And then taxes come. There's also another argument, which is based on accounting. Specifically, when the government actually receives high-powered money, then that high-powered money has to be destroyed by the Federal Reserve System because the money is a liability of the federal government And when the liabilities of the issuer of the currency are returned to the issuer, then those liabilities have to be extinguished. Here's a quote, from Stephanie. Many readers will remain unconvinced, based on the intuitive analysis just presented, that the treatment of taxation and bond sales as financing operations should be discontinued. Fortunately, there is another, more powerful method by which to argue that taxation and bond sales should not be considered financing operations. The argument is a technical one from the viewpoint of accounting, that is, and requires an understanding that Federal Reserve notes and reserves are booked as liabilities on the Fed's balance sheet. So in other words, this is a technical argument from the standpoint of accounting, and that these liabilities are extinguished / discharged when they're offered in payment to the state. It must also be recognized that when currency or reserves return to the state, the liabilities of the state are reduced and high-powered money is therefore destroyed. The destruction of these promises is no different from the private destruction of a promise once it has been fulfilled. In other words, when an individual takes out a loan, she issues a promise to a bank, that is, the promise that she will repay the loan with interest. Once she makes good on that promise, i.e., repays the loan, she may, quote, destroy, unquote, that loan debt, specifically the liability, by eliminating it from her balance sheet. In other words, before she repays, she has a liability on her balance sheet. But when she repays, she may destroy that loan debt or liability. And she does that by eliminating it from her balance sheet. Likewise, the state, once it fulfills its promise to accept its own money, high-powered money, at state pay offices, can eliminate an equivalent number of these liabilities from its balance sheet. Thus, while bank money, M1, is destroyed when demand deposits are used to pay taxes, in other words, when your savings are used to pay taxes, the government's money, high-powered money, HPM, is destroyed as the funds are placed into the Treasury's account at the Fed. Viewed this way, it can be convincingly argued that the money collected from taxation and bond sales cannot possibly finance the government spending. This is because in order to get its hands on the proceeds from taxation and bond sales, in order specifically to have the Fed put new money into the Treasury spending account, the government must first destroy the money it has collected, the high-powered money. that was paid into the Treasury spending account. Clearly, government spending cannot be financed by money that is destroyed when received in payment to the state. How? If not by using the money received in payment of taxes and bond sales, does the government finance its spending? Notice, Stephanie says, that the government writes checks on an account that does not comprise part of the money supply or HPM, but that as it does, as it writes those checks, the funds become part of the money supply. M1 if deposited into checking accounts, M2 if deposited into savings accounts. And that therefore becomes part of high-powered money. It is therefore apparent that while the payment of taxes destroys an equivalent amount of money, M1 immediately, and HPM as the proceeds go into the Treasury's account at the Fed, spending from this account creates an equivalent amount of new money, both bank money and HPM. Why? That's a hard one to see. Well, when the money is in the Treasury spending account, that new money that has been placed in the Treasury spending account by the Federal Reserve is not in the money supply, because the Treasury spending account is not part of the money supply. It's not part of the money supply in the economy. It's not part of the money supply that is in the private sector. But spending from the reserves that the Fed creates in the Treasury spending account after destroying the previous liabilities that had been issued by the state creates an equivalent amount of new money. And the new money is both high-powered money, which is placed into the Federal Reserve System by the Treasury spending, and also the bank money that your bank actually places into your account after your bank gets its high-powered money from the government. Modern governments then, Stephanie concludes, finance all of their spending through the direct creation of new high-powered money. That is new state money, which is high-powered because it is the most acceptable money that is in the economy. So those are basically the two arguments for saying that taxes do not actually precede spending, and therefore they do not fund spending. What happens instead is that the spending occurs first, and what the taxing does is to collect the previous liabilities. It's collecting the previous liabilities of the government and zeroing out those liabilities, destroying those liabilities, in the settlement process. Now, here's the problem. Here's a political problem. Here is a practical problem. Specifically, because of the way Congress acts, it seems to us that what's happening is that the government is actually getting money, that it's getting its liabilities back through taxing and through issuing bonds, and that it's reusing those liabilities to spend. But that neglects the accounting process, because when the government collects its old liabilities and then deposits them into its account, in the settlement process, those liabilities have to be destroyed, and for the government to get an equivalent amount of money, that has to be new high-powered money that is issued by the Federal Reserve. So here's the problem. Okay, it appears to us as though the taxing and selling of bonds is coming first. That is just some impression left with us because we don't understand the accounting process and the settlement process at the banks. But if we believe that the taxing and the bond sales come first, and the spending uses the proceeds of those in order to spend, then we will have the impression that we must tax or borrow before we can spend. And that is false. It's a false belief that persuades us that the taxing and or the bond sales are necessary before we can spend. And that constrains our fiscal policy. That belief constrains our fiscal policy. Okay. And it tends our fiscal policy towards governmental austerity. It tends to make us think that sooner or later the borrowing of money from the private sector through the bond process sooner or later means that we will have to pay back those debts, the bond debt. And that if we really wanted to be financially clean, we would have to pay down the federal debt to a much lower level than we have it now, or even pay it down to zero. But neither that nor the idea that taxes are the ultimate source of revenue that enables spending is true. Both of those beliefs are actually false. And the way this constrains us is we never think about the federal government simply issuing money without any taxing and without any bond sales. We tend to think this is not a possibility. And so we act as if the taxes and the borrowing, the sale of bonds, the sale of securities, that those things come first and spending comes last. But if we accept that it is the government that is the sole creator of high-powered money, then we realize that if the government has to issue high-powered money to meet its particular needs, then we understand that all that has to happen under the Constitution of the United States is that the Congress has to appropriate the money and has in some way to create rules or in some way to create a mandate requiring the Federal Reserve to place the money required by the appropriation into the Treasury spending account so the appropriation can be spent into the private sector by the government. And that creates a freedom that does not exist when we believe that the taxing and borrowing has to come first. Then it becomes possible for us to envision that if we need something or if we want something, all the Congress has to do is to appropriate the money and issue an order to the Federal Reserve to place that money into the Treasury spending account and let the Treasury do the rest. The fact that we do not think this is the way things go constrains us. It ties us up in knots of various kinds and into bickering over we're going to raise taxes or not raise taxes. We fight about should we raise taxes or should we not pay taxes to pay for X. But as Stephanie showed in her paper, the taxes and bond sales do not pay for X. What pays for X is the money that exists in the Treasury spending account. And we can get the money needed into the Treasury spending account in a variety of ways. Yes, tax revenues and bond revenues will trigger business rules at the Federal Reserve to create new high-powered money for the Treasury spending account while extinguishing the liabilities. That's one way of doing it. But a second way of doing it is just having the Congress order the Fed to place the new money into the Treasury spending account, even though we don't have an extinguishing of older liabilities. A third way of doing it that's correct under law is that once the appropriation is made, the Treasury Department can create coin seigniorage under a 1996 coin law, which would trigger the Federal Reserve to deposit that coin seigniorage, which could be in the trillions of dollars, into the Treasury spending account. The process of putting coin seigniorage into the Treasury spending account is completely independent of whether taxing and borrowing is going on. If the Federal Reserve gets a deposit of coins, say it gets a deposit of a 1 ounce platinum coin that is denominated by 100, with a face value of $100 trillion, and the deposit of that coin would trigger the Fed into placing reserves of that amount into the public enterprise fund of the Mint, and the Mint in turn can sweep the coin seigniorage into the Treasury spending account. So that's another way of getting the necessary money into the Treasury spending account. There are still other ways to get money into the Treasury spending account to spend a congressional appropriation. I'm not going to go over those other ways, but my book, Fixing a Debt Without Breaking America, goes into 7 different ways to get money into the Treasury spending account. So I refer you to that book if you're interested in all the different ways. But the point is, the spending is financed by the spending itself. It's the spending that creates new money in the private sector. If you want to look at the precursors of financing, then those precursors include the appropriation of funds by the Congress, and then the use of one of the methods of triggering the Federal Reserve to create new high-powered money to get that money into the Treasury spending account. So, it's important that we not think in terms of taxes and bond revenue coming first and spending actually coming next, so that we can perceive and we can believe that the issuance of new money into the Treasury spending account can occur through other means, such as minting coins and giving the Federal Reserve direct orders to place a certain amount of money into the Treasury spending account. So I hope that's all very clear. Kay Ryan says, I've heard this over and over, so I'm out of here for tonight, Joe. Okay, Kay. Thank you. And Kay says, hi, Joe. Lana says, hi, all. Kay says, until the Fed admits MMT, okay, it will do no good. Well, maybe that's so, but Kay, what I'm trying to do is to get people to believe that it's the spending that comes first and not the taxes, and that there are different methods of getting new high powered money into the Treasury spending account. So, in other words, I am trying to get all kinds of people, including the Fed, to admit that the federal government is free to create as much money as it needs in order to fulfill the public purpose. And that it need not wait for taxes, it need not wait for bond proceeds. What it does have to do is to decide to spend for the public purpose and not worry so much about the bond issuance, not worry so much about the taxes, not worry about taxing dollar for dollar compared to what is spent. Kay says, hi, Lana. Kay says, we have to work with what we have, Joe. Jeff Denton says, I don't want to burst anyone's bubble, but banks can lend out money that they don't actually physically possess. And I don't know why anyone would claim America's a capitalist country when the banks literally have no competition. I suppose if everyone could lend out money that they don't possess, then we might be a truly capitalist country with an actual free market that isn't flooded with the monopolies. Well, I don't think you're bursting my bubble by pointing that out, Jeff. I certainly don't believe that America is a pure capitalist country. Okay, I think America is an oligarchy. Jeff Denton says, I suppose that the CIA might have had to go through Congress when it gave Jeff Bezos 600 million to put Alexa in millions of American homes. Well, the CIA did go through Congress in the sense, Jeff, that the CIA had to request from Congress a particular appropriation, which it got from Congress. And along with the appropriation was the authority to do contracts with private sector firms. And the $600 million that you referred to was a contract between the CIA and Jeff Bezos to put Alexa in millions of American homes. That's what the process was. It did involve Congress. Congress was part of the process. Are there any other comments or questions? Okay, then. I must mention, as I usually do, that donations through my patreon.com/Joe_Firestone account are greatly appreciated. And also donations at www.buymeacoffee.com/Joe.Firestone are also greatly appreciated. I also want to mention that I will be back tomorrow night with the Thanksgiving Day show at 9 o'clock. Okay. I will not have the other two streams tomorrow because it's Thanksgiving and we want to celebrate Thanksgiving. But there will be a show tomorrow night. Who want to see a show? Uh, Hopefully, I'll see some of you then. And for tonight, okay, I wish you a happy Thanksgiving. Until we get to see each other again tomorrow night. So thank you very much. And I will end the broadcast.